He was just a struggling single father working the night shift at a packaging warehouse, barely keeping his head above water. She was the powerful CEO in the corner office, making million-dollar decisions while he swept floors 3 stories below. The only reason their worlds collided was a burning school bus, 2 terrified little girls, and a split-second decision that would change everything. What happened next will challenge everything you believe about courage, hidden connections, and the way one moment of bravery can rewrite 2 people's destinies forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Benjamin Romano's alarm clock screamed at 10:47 p.m., just as it had every night for the past 3 years. The sound cut through the thin walls of his 1-bedroom apartment in Millbrook Heights, jolting him from the restless half-sleep that had become his specialty since everything fell apart. He rolled over, squinting at the cracked ceiling where a water stain had grown into the shape of something that might have been optimistic once, but now just looked like disappointment. The apartment was small, sparse, and meticulously clean, in the way of a man who had learned that controlling the little things helped when the big things spiraled beyond reach. A fold-out couch served as his bed, positioned so he could see straight into the tiny alcove where 7-year-old Emma slept, her breathing steady and peaceful in a way that made his chest tight with gratitude and terror in equal measure. Her school backpack sat by the door, lunch packed and ready, permission slips signed in his careful handwriting. He'd learned to forge a lot of things over the past few years: confidence, optimism, the signature of a man who had his life together. Benjamin pulled himself upright, muscles protesting the movement. At 34, he felt decades older, worn thin by night shifts at Cromwell Industrial Packaging, and days spent being the kind of father Emma deserved, even when he wasn't sure he knew how to be any kind of father at all. The mirror in the bathroom reflected back a stranger, hollow-eyed, stubbled, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. He splashed cold water on his face and tried to remember the last time he'd looked in a mirror and recognized the person staring back 3 years ago. He'd been Benjamin Romano, senior data analyst at Lombardi Enterprises, one of the most prestigious tech consulting firms on the West Coast. He'd worn tailored shirts, attended strategy meetings, and believed that hard work and integrity would eventually pay off. He'd had a corner cubicle with a view of downtown Ashford, a 401k that was actually growing, and a future that seemed as solid as the glass and steel building where he spent his days. That was before he discovered the discrepancies in the quarterly reports, before he spent sleepless nights cross-referencing data that didn't add up, following digital breadcrumbs that led to accounting irregularities he couldn't ignore, before he made the decision that would cost him everything he'd built and leave him with the one thing that mattered most: Emma. The irregularities weren't small. Someone had been systematically redirecting funds from client accounts, skimming percentages that individually seemed insignificant but collectively added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Benjamin had spent 2 weeks building an airtight case, documenting every transaction, every forged signature, every manipulated entry. He'd been meticulous, professional, certain that bringing this to light was not just the right thing to do, but the only thing to do. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly the corporate machine could turn against someone who threatened its carefully constructed narrative. Within 48 hours of submitting his report, Benjamin found himself called into a conference room where he faced not gratitude for his diligence, but accusations of misconduct, questions about his own access to the accounts, and the suggestion that perhaps his recent divorce and custody battle had affected his judgment. The evidence he'd compiled disappeared into legal limbo. His access badges were revoked. His reputation was quietly but thoroughly shredded through whispered conversations and strategically leaked information that painted him as a disgruntled employee with a grudge. Within a month, he was unemployed, blacklisted in an industry where reputation meant everything, and fighting for custody of Emma while his ex-wife's lawyers painted him as unstable and potentially dangerous. He'd won custody. Barely, but the victory came at a price that left him financially ruined and professionally destroyed. The corporate world had closed ranks against him, and Benjamin Romano the analyst became Benjamin Romano the night shift warehouse worker, invisible in his safety vest and steel-toed boots, moving boxes for $12 an hour while trying to rebuild a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Now, pulling on his work uniform in the pre-dawn darkness, Benjamin allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to remember what it felt like to believe the system rewarded honesty. Then he locked those thoughts away, kissed his sleeping daughter's forehead, and headed out into the cold Ashford night. Cromwell Industrial Packaging sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex of warehouses and loading docks that never slept. Benjamin badged in at 11:30 p.m., nodding to Rico, a security guard who'd become something close to a friend over the past 3 years. Rico was one of the few people who didn't ask questions about how a man with Benjamin's education and bearing had ended up working the graveyard shift in a warehouse. "Quiet night," Rico said, handing him the clipboard with the evening's assignments. "Johnson called in sick, so you're covering sections C and D." Benjamin nodded, grateful for the extra work. Overtime meant Emma could take the art classes she wanted, maybe even the summer camp her friends were attending. Every additional hour he worked was another brick in the wall he was building between his daughter and the poverty that snapped at their heels like a hungry dog. The warehouse floor was a cathedral of commerce, 40-foot ceilings supported by steel beams, endless rows of shelving containing products destined for stores across 3 states. Forklifts hummed along marked pathways, their backup beepers creating a mechanical symphony that had become the soundtrack to Benjamin's nights. He moved through his sections with practiced efficiency, scanning barcodes, updating inventory, maintaining the careful organization that kept the supply chain flowing. By 3 a.m., the warehouse had settled into the quiet rhythm of deep night. Benjamin was alone in Section D, checking a shipment of electronics components, when he heard Rico's radio crackle to life in the distance. Something about an accident on Route 47, emergency vehicles responding. He thought nothing of it. Route 47 was the main thoroughfare through Ashford, and accidents happened. What he didn't know, as he continued his methodical work in the fluorescent-lit aisles, was that 15 miles away, a school bus carrying 32 students home from a late-night academic competition was hydroplaning on rain-slicked asphalt, the driver fighting for control as the vehicle skidded toward the guardrail that separated the roadway from a steep embankment. Benjamin Romano had spent 3 years invisible, forgotten, written off by a world that had decided he didn't matter. In 47 minutes, that was all going to change. The rain had started just after midnight, a steady drumbeat against the metal roof of the warehouse that Benjamin had learned to find oddly comforting. Rain meant fewer people on the roads. During his drive home, fewer risks to navigate in the pre-dawn darkness, when exhaustion made even familiar streets feel treacherous. He was finishing up Section D, ready to start the final inventory check before his shift ended, when his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chun, Emma's elderly babysitter who lived in the apartment across the hall. Emma had a nightmare around 2, told her daddy was working hard to take care of her. She went back to sleep with a smile. "You're doing good, Benjamin." He stared at the screen for longer than necessary, feeling something tight in his chest loosen just slightly. Mrs. Chun never charged him enough for watching Emma, never complained about the irregular hours or the way his daughter sometimes cried for her father in the middle of the night. She was one of the few people in Benjamin's life who seemed to see past the uniform and the late hours to something worth believing in. He was sliding the phone back into his pocket when Rico's voice echoed across the warehouse floor, urgent and sharp in a way that made Benjamin's head snap up. "Romano, you still here?" "Section D," Benjamin called back, already moving toward the front of the warehouse. Something in Rico's tone made his pulse quicken. He found Rico standing by the security desk, holding his radio with one hand while scribbling notes with the other. The older man's face was grim, focused in a way Benjamin had never seen during their quiet night conversations. "What's going on?" Benjamin asked. Rico looked up. "Bad accident on Route 47. School bus went off the road about 10 minutes ago. They're calling for all available emergency personnel, but it's going to take time to get equipment out there." He gestured toward the window that faced the highway. In the distance, red and blue lights strobed against the low-hanging clouds. "Dispatch says the bus is hanging over the embankment. They can see smoke." Benjamin felt something cold settle in his stomach. Smoke? Smoke? Engine fire, maybe electrical. Could be nothing, could be everything. Rico was already reaching for his jacket. "I'm driving out there. Company policy says I should stay put, but..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so... If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm coming with you," Benjamin said without thinking. Rico paused, studying him. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Benjamin was already moving toward the employee lockers where he kept his jacket. He couldn't have explained the urgency that was building in his chest, the sense that this wasn't a choice but a compulsion. Somewhere in the rain and darkness, people needed help, and he was here, and he was capable, and for the first time in 3 years it felt like it meant something. They took Rico's pickup truck, a beat-up Ford that rattled but ran, racing down Route 47 toward the growing constellation of emergency lights. The rain was coming harder now, turning the windshield into a kaleidoscope of refracted red and blue. Benjamin gripped the door handle as Rico took a curve too fast, tires sliding slightly on the slick asphalt. "There," Rico said, pointing ahead. Jesus Christ. The school bus was exactly where dispatch had described it, nose down over the guardrail, rear wheels still on the pavement, but the front half suspended over a 20-foot drop into a creek that ran parallel to the highway. Steam rose from the engine compartment, and Benjamin could see the orange glow of flames beginning to lick at the undercarriage. Emergency vehicles had beaten them there, but not by much. 2 police cars, an ambulance, and a fire truck that looked like it had seen better decades. Paramedics and firefighters were moving with controlled urgency, but Benjamin could see the problem immediately. The bus was positioned at an angle that made it nearly impossible to approach safely. Any sudden movement, any shift in weight distribution, and the entire vehicle could tip forward and plunge into the creek below. Rico parked behind the police barricade, and they both jumped out, joining the crowd of first responders and growing cluster of parents who had somehow already gotten word and driven out into the night. Benjamin could hear voices inside the bus, not screaming, which was somehow worse. The kind of quiet, controlled terror that meant people were trying very hard not to panic. "How many?" he heard someone ask. 32 students, 1 driver," came the response. "Academic decathlon team from Ashford High. Drivers unconscious but breathing. Students are responsive but trapped. We can't get the door open from this angle, and we can't risk destabilizing the bus." Benjamin found himself moving forward, drawn by some instinct he didn't fully understand. He'd never been trained for emergency response, had never considered himself the kind of person who ran toward danger instead of away from it. But as he got closer to the bus, he could hear individual voices through the rain, young voices, scared voices trying to stay calm while smoke began to seep through the floorboards. "We need to get them out through the emergency exits," one of the firefighters was saying. "But we need someone small enough to get in there and help them from the inside. The weight distribution is too unstable for our guys in full gear." Benjamin looked at the bus, calculating angles and risks with the same methodical precision he'd once used to analyze data. The emergency door at the rear was accessible, barely. If someone could squeeze through the gap between the tilted bus and the guardrail. The windows along the side were another possibility, though they'd need to be broken from the inside. "I can do it," he said, the words coming out before his rational mind could stop them. The firefighter turned, taking in Benjamin's slight build and civilian clothes. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm small enough to get through the emergency door. I can help evacuate from the inside while you stabilize from out here." Benjamin was already stripping off his jacket, his movements quick and decisive. "Those are kids in there, and they're running out of time." For a moment, the scene paused. Rain drummed against the overturned bus. Emergency radios crackled. And 32 teenagers waited in the growing smoke while adults decided what calculated risks were acceptable. "Benjamin." Rico's voice, quiet and certain. "You sure about this?" Benjamin looked at his friend, then at the bus, then at the growing glow of fire that was creeping closer to the fuel tank. He thought of Emma, asleep in their tiny apartment, trusting that her father would come home safe. He thought of Mrs. Chun's text about doing good, about being someone his daughter could be proud of. "I'm sure," he said, and meant it completely. The firefighter, Captain Williams, according to his badge, studied Benjamin for another heartbeat. Then he nodded. "You get them organized and moving toward the emergency door. We'll have lines ready to help them down. You stay in communication." He handed Benjamin a small radio. "Any sign that bus is shifting, you get out. Understood?" "Understood." Benjamin took a deep breath, said a prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening, and squeezed through the gap between metal and concrete into the smoke-filled interior of the bus where 32 scared teenagers were about to discover that sometimes heroes look exactly like the people you'd never notice in daylight. Inside the bus, the world had tilted into nightmare geometry. Seats hung at impossible angles, backpacks and textbooks scattered like confetti from some twisted celebration. The smell of smoke was getting stronger, mixed with diesel fuel and the sharp scent of fear. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, turning familiar objects into alien shapes that Benjamin's eyes took precious seconds to decipher. "Hey!" he called out, his voice cutting through the quiet sobs and whispered prayers. "I'm here to help. Everyone stay calm and listen to my voice." 32 faces turned toward him, some streaked with tears, others set in the determined blankness of people trying not to fall apart. They were older than Emma, high schoolers, probably 16 to 18, but in the strange light and tilted chaos, they looked impossibly young. "My name is Benjamin," he said, moving carefully toward the back of the bus where the emergency door waited. "We're going to get everyone out, but we need to do this smart and safe." "Who's hurt?" a chorus of voices responded. Most injuries seemed minor, cuts from broken glass, bruises from the impact, the kind of trauma that felt catastrophic in the moment, but would heal cleanly. But Benjamin could see at least 3 students who weren't moving much, including 2 girls near the front who seemed to be unconscious. "You two," he pointed to a pair of boys who looked alert and capable. "What are your names?" "Trevor," said the taller one. "This is Miguel." "Trevor and Miguel, I need you to help me get the emergency door open. The rest of you, when I call your section, you move carefully but quickly toward this door. No pushing, no running. We're going to get through this." The emergency door was jammed, twisted slightly in its frame by the impact. Benjamin braced his feet against the tilted floor and pulled, muscles straining against metal that had never been designed to open at this angle. Trevor and Miguel added their strength to his, and slowly, grudgingly, the door gave way with a screech of protesting. Hinges. Cool air rushed in, carrying the sound of voices from outside. Captain Williams appeared in the opening, safety lines already prepared. "How many injured?" Williams called. 3 unconscious up front, maybe half a dozen with cuts and bruises, Benjamin responded. "Everyone else is mobile." Let's start with the walking wounded. For the next 20 minutes, Benjamin Romano became someone he'd never imagined he could be. He organized evacuations like a general managing a battlefield, prioritized medical needs like a triage nurse, and kept 32 terrified teenagers calm with the steady authority of a man who had somehow found exactly the right words at exactly the right moment. He carried the two unconscious girls to safety himself, their slight weight seeming impossibly precious as he navigated the twisted interior of the bus and handed them carefully through the emergency door to waiting paramedics. His hands were steady, his voice calm, his movements efficient and sure. Later, he would wonder where this version of himself had come from. This person who ran toward danger and knew exactly what to do when other people needed help. The last student out was a girl named Sarah who had been too scared to move until Benjamin sat beside her in the smoke-filled bus and talked her through every step, his voice gentle and patient while flames licked closer to the fuel tank. She clung to his hand as they made their way to the emergency door, and when they finally reached safety, she hugged him with the fierce gratitude of someone who had just been reminded that the world contained people who would risk everything for strangers. Benjamin emerged from the bus just as the fire department finally got their equipment positioned to pull the vehicle back from the embankment. His clothes were torn and smoky, his hands cut from broken glass, his face streaked with soot. He looked like a disaster survivor. Not a hero, but the crowd that had gathered, parents and first responders and late-night commuters who had stopped to help, saw something different. They saw a man who had climbed into a burning bus without hesitation, who had organized a complex evacuation with calm efficiency, who had carried unconscious teenagers to safety and stayed until every single person was accounted for. They saw someone who had risked everything for people he didn't even know, simply because it was the right thing to do. What Benjamin saw was different. He saw Emma, who would be waking up in a few hours and needed her father to be alive and whole. He saw Mrs. Chun, who had trusted him to come home safely. He saw the warehouse where his shift was ending and the responsibilities that would be waiting when he got back to his real life. "Sir," Captain Williams appeared beside him, medical kit in hand. "Let me take a look at those cuts." "I'm fine," Benjamin said, already stepping back toward Rico's truck. "Really, just want to go home." "Wait," Williams caught his arm gently. "I need your name for the report, contact information. What you did tonight." "I did what anyone would do," Benjamin interrupted. "The firefighters did the real work. I just helped get people organized." But even as he said it, Benjamin could see phones pointed in his direction, could hear conversations that included words like hero and amazing. "Did you see how he just climbed right in there?" Someone had been recording, probably multiple someones. In the age of social media, nothing stayed private long, especially not something like this. Rico drove him back to the warehouse in silence, both men processing what had just happened. It wasn't until they were pulling into the parking lot that Rico spoke. "You know that's going to be on the news, right? What you did back there." Benjamin stared out the window at the familiar building where he'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible. "I hope not, Ben." Rico's voice was gentle but firm. "You saved 32 kids tonight. People are going to want to know who you are. I don't want them to know who I am." The words came out sharper than Benjamin had intended. "I just want to finish my shift and go home to my daughter." But it was already too late. As Benjamin walked back into the warehouse, his phone was buzzing with notifications. Facebook tags, Twitter mentions, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Someone had already identified him, probably through his employee badge or the license plate on Rico's truck. By morning, Benjamin Romano would be famous whether he wanted to be or not. He tried to focus on work, on the familiar routine of inventory and organization that had kept him grounded for 3 years. But every few minutes, his phone would light up with another notification, Another reminder that his carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling down at 6 a.m. When his shift finally ended, Benjamin drove home through an Ashford that was just beginning to wake up. The rain had stopped, and morning light was painting the sky in soft pastels that made everything look clean and hopeful. He parked outside his apartment building and sat for a moment in the silence, trying to figure out how to explain to Emma that their quiet life might be about to change in ways he couldn't predict or control. Mrs. Chun met him at the door, her face creased with worry and something that might have been pride. "Benjamin," she said softly, "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said automatically, then stopped. Mrs. Chun deserved better than automatic responses. "I'm tired and worried about what this means for Emma." "It means her father is a hero," Mrs. Chun said simply. "And sometimes heroes have to learn that hiding their light doesn't make the world any safer." Benjamin looked past her into the apartment, where Emma was still sleeping, curled up on her bed with the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since she was 3. Everything about their life was small, careful, protected. Everything about what had happened tonight was the opposite of that. "I just want her to be okay," he said. Mrs. Chun reached out and patted his shoulder with the gentle authority of someone who had raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "She will be. Because you're her father, and tonight you proved that when people need help, you show up. That's exactly the kind of man a little girl needs to believe in." Benjamin nodded, not trusting his voice. He thanked Mrs. Chun, slipped quietly into the apartment, and stood for a long time watching his daughter sleep. Outside, Ashford was waking up to a story it hadn't expected, about a man who had spent 3 years invisible and suddenly wasn't invisible anymore. By noon, his phone would have 43 missed calls. By evening, there would be news vans on his street. And somewhere in the city, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the harbor, Sophie Lombardi would be watching the footage of the bus rescue while trying to figure out why the hero's face looked so familiar. Benjamin woke at 2 p.m. to the sound of Emma's laughter, filtering through the thin apartment walls, mixed with voices he didn't recognize. He'd managed 4 hours of sleep, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion despite his mind's refusal to stop replaying the night's events. His hands were bandaged now. Mrs. Chun had insisted on cleaning and dressing the cuts while he was too tired to argue, and his shoulders ached from the unusual strain of carrying unconscious teenagers through smoke-filled chaos. He pulled on jeans and a clean t-shirt, running a hand through hair that still smelled faintly of diesel smoke despite his shower. Emma's voice grew clearer as he approached the living room, animated in the way that meant she was excited about something. "And my daddy works really hard every night, and he makes sure I have lunch money and helps me with my math homework, and Mrs. Chun says he's the best daddy in the whole building. He sounds pretty special," came an unfamiliar voice, warm and professional. Benjamin rounded the corner to find Emma sitting on their fold-out couch between Mrs. Chun and a woman he'd never seen before. The stranger wore a navy blazer and pressed slacks, her dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested important meetings and corner offices. She was beautiful in the carefully polished way of someone accustomed to being photographed, but there was something in her eyes that looked tired, almost fragile beneath the professional composure. Emma spotted him first. "Daddy." She launched herself off the couch and into his arms with the enthusiasm of someone who had been saving up hugs for hours. "Mrs. Chun told me you were really brave last night. And this nice lady wants to talk to you." Benjamin caught Emma's hug while studying the stranger over his daughter's head. She was standing now, and he could see the expensive cut of her clothes, the subtle makeup that had been applied by someone who knew what they were doing. Everything about her screamed corporate executive, which meant this visit was probably about last night, and that meant his careful anonymity was officially over. "Mr. Romano," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Sophie Lombardi. I was hoping I could have a few minutes of your time." The name hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Sophie Lombardi, CEO of Lombardi Enterprises. The woman whose signature had been on his termination letter 3 years ago, whose company had destroyed his reputation and left him blacklisted from the career he'd spent a decade building. He stared at her outstretched hand, his mind reeling through possibilities and implications, while Emma chattered happily about her morning. "Emma, honey," he managed, his voice sounding normal despite the chaos in his head. "Why don't you go show Mrs. Chun that drawing you were working on?" Emma bounced away, completely oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the small room. Mrs. Chun, who was far more perceptive, gathered Emma's art supplies with unusual efficiency and ushered her toward the kitchen table. "We'll be right over here if you need anything," Mrs. Chun said pointedly, positioning herself where she could keep an eye on both Emma and whatever conversation was about to happen. Benjamin turned back to Sophie Lombardi, trying to reconcile the polished executive in his living room with the distant figure who had represented everything that had gone wrong in his life. She was smaller than he'd expected, more real somehow. On the rare occasions when he'd seen her during his time at Lombardi Enterprises, she'd been a figure glimpsed through conference room windows or walking past cubicles with an entourage of assistants. Now she was standing in his apartment, looking almost nervous. "Ms. Lombardi," he said carefully, "what can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you did last night, and to apologize for not recognizing you sooner." Benjamin felt his jaw tighten. "Recognizing me?" Sophie's composure slipped slightly. "You worked for my company." "Benjamin Romano, senior data analyst. You left us about 3 years ago." "I was fired," Benjamin said flatly, "after I reported accounting irregularities that no one wanted to investigate." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Sophie's face went pale, and Benjamin saw something shift behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. Yes. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I remember your case." "The final decision was made by the board, based on recommendations from Based on Lies," Benjamin interrupted. "Based on the decision that it was easier to destroy one analyst than investigate systemic fraud." Emma's voice drifted from the kitchen table, something about purple crayons and rainbow trees. The normal, innocent sound of his daughter's happiness created a strange counterpoint to the conversation that was unraveling everything Benjamin had tried to put behind him. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, less certain. "The girls you saved last night, they were my daughters." Benjamin blinked, the revelation shifting his understanding of why she was here. "Your daughters?" "Twins. Lily and Rose. They were on the academic decathlon team." Sophie's professional mask was cracking now, revealing something raw underneath. "They called me from the hospital around 4 a.m. Lily couldn't stop talking about the man who carried her to safety. She said he had kind eyes and gentle hands, and that he told her everything was going to be okay." Benjamin remembered Lily, one of the unconscious girls he'd carried from the bus. She'd been so still, so fragile, and he'd whispered reassurances to her even though he wasn't sure she could hear him. The idea that this composed executive was her mother, that those terrified teenagers had parents who loved them and worried about them, made the whole night feel different somehow. "Are they okay?" he asked. "Concussions. Some cuts and bruises." "They'll be fine, thanks to you." Sophie's voice was thick with emotion she was trying to control. "When I saw the news footage this morning and realized who you were, I had to come. I had to see you and try to understand." She trailed off, but Benjamin could see the question in her eyes. How did the man her company had destroyed become the hero who saved her children? How did someone she'd written off as a disgruntled former employee turn out to be the person who risked everything for strangers? Try to understand what? He prompted. Sophie looked around the small apartment, taking in the careful organization, the signs of a life being lived on a Very tight budget, the evidence of a single father doing everything he could to create stability for his daughter. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think I made a terrible mistake." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications that Benjamin wasn't sure he was ready to explore. For 3 years he'd imagined this moment. Confronting the people who had destroyed his life, demanding explanations, getting the recognition he deserved. But now that it was happening, all he felt was tired. "Ms. Lombardi," he said carefully, "I appreciate you coming here. I'm glad your daughters are safe. But if this is about the past, it's about the future," she interrupted. "It's about the fact that I've spent 3 years knowing something was wrong with how your case was handled, and I didn't do anything about it because it was easier to let sleeping dogs lie. And now," she gestured helplessly, "now I've seen what kind of man you really are, and I can't pretend anymore that we did the right thing." Emma appeared at Benjamin's elbow, having escaped Mrs. Chun's supervision with the stealth that 7-year-olds had perfected over millennia. "Daddy, are you sad? You look sad." Benjamin knelt to Emma's level, smoothing her hair back from her face. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just having a grown-up conversation. Is the nice lady sad too? She looks like she might cry." Benjamin glanced up at Sophie, who was indeed looking like she might cry. The polished executive facade had completely crumbled, leaving behind someone who looked lost and guilty and desperate to find a way to make things right. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad when they realize they've made mistakes," Benjamin said gently. "But that's okay, because people can always try to do better." Emma nodded solemnly, then looked up at Sophie with the direct, unguarded curiosity of someone too young to understand the weight of corporate politics and destroyed reputations. "My daddy says mistakes are just chances to learn something new," Emma announced. "And that the important thing is saying sorry and trying to fix it." Sophie's breath caught, and Benjamin saw tears gathering in her eyes. She knelt down to Emma's level, matching Benjamin's position. "Your daddy is very smart," Sophie said softly. "And you're very lucky to have him." "I know," Emma said with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her father's love. "He takes care of me and reads me stories and makes really good pancakes on Sundays, and now he's famous for being brave." Sophie looked up at Benjamin, and in her expression he saw something he'd stopped hoping for 3 years ago. Someone finally seeing him clearly, finally understanding what they'd lost when they decided he was disposable. "Mr. Romano," she said, standing slowly, "would you be willing to have a longer conversation? Not here, not now, but somewhere we can talk properly about what happened and what might be possible going forward." Benjamin studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or corporate strategy. What he saw instead was genuine remorse and something that might have been hope. "I'll think about it," he said. Sophie nodded, reaching into her purse and pulling out a business card. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly, and Benjamin felt something electric pass between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. The recognition of two people who had been shaped by the same devastating event and were only now beginning to understand how it had affected them both. "Thank you," she said simply, "for saving my daughters. For being the kind of man who runs toward danger instead of away from it, and for giving me a chance to finally do the right thing." She said goodbye to Emma, who hugged her with the unconscious generosity of someone who had inherited her father's capacity for kindness. Then Sophie Lombardi walked out of Benjamin Romano's small apartment and back into her world of boardrooms and corporate decisions, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the promise that everything was about to change. 3 days later, Benjamin found himself sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Ashford, staring at Sophie Lombardi across a small table that felt like it might as well be a courtroom bench. She'd chosen the location, neutral ground, she'd said, somewhere they could talk without the weight of corporate offices or the intimacy of his apartment. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for serious conversation, filled with the low hum of laptop keyboards and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Benjamin had spent those 3 days trying to decide whether to accept her invitation. The rational part of his mind, the part that had been protecting him and Emma for 3 years, said it was a trap. That Sophie Lombardi was a CEO first and everything else second, and that CEOs didn't get to the top by admitting mistakes or making things right. They got there by managing problems, controlling narratives, and protecting their companies from liability. But Emma had asked about the nice lady who looked sad, and Mrs. Chun had pointed out that sometimes the hardest conversations were the ones that needed to happen most. And somewhere underneath his cynicism and carefully constructed defenses, Benjamin found he wanted answers. Not just apologies or corporate speak explanations, but the truth about what had really happened, and why his career had been sacrificed on the altar of someone else's ambition. Sophie looked different today. Still polished, still clearly expensive, but less armored somehow. She wore a simple sweater instead of a blazer, her hair was looser, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she'd been sleeping as poorly as Benjamin had. When she saw him walk in, her expression shifted through relief, nervousness, and something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." Benjamin accepted the coffee. She'd already ordered for him, black, which meant she'd done her homework or remembered his preferences from some corporate database. "But I have questions, and I figure I'm never going to get another chance to ask them." Sophie nodded, wrapping. Her hands around her own cup like it was an anchor. "Ask anything. I'll tell you everything I know." Benjamin studied her face, looking for signs of the corporate doublespeak he'd learned to recognize during his years in the business world. What he saw instead was someone who looked genuinely prepared to be honest, even if it hurt. "Why didn't anyone investigate my report?" he asked. "I had documentation, transaction records, proof that someone was systematically stealing from client accounts. Why was it easier to discredit me than to look into what I'd found?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee. When she spoke, her voice was careful but clear. "Because the person stealing was Daniel Morrison, my VP of Finance. My right-hand man for 8 years. The person I trusted to handle all our major accounts." Benjamin felt something cold settle in his stomach. Daniel Morrison had been untouchable at Lombardi Enterprises, the golden boy who could do no wrong, the executive who'd been rumored to be Sophie's likely successor. If Morrison had been the one skimming funds, he knew, Benjamin said. It wasn't a question, I suspected. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. There had been other reports, smaller discrepancies that Morrison always managed to explain away. But you were the first person with the analytical skills and the persistence to build a comprehensive case. And when you brought me that report..." She trailed off, but Benjamin could see the rest of the story in her expression. The weight of corporate politics, the difficulty of admitting that her most trusted executive was betraying her, the easier path of making the problem disappear by discrediting the messenger. "You chose him over the truth," Benjamin said. "I chose stability over disruption. I chose protecting the company's reputation over protecting what was right." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I told myself that maybe you were wrong, that maybe there was another explanation. But deep down, I knew you were right. And I was a coward." The honesty of it hit Benjamin like a physical blow. For 3 years, he'd imagined confronting the people responsible for his downfall, had scripted angry speeches and righteous demands for justice. What he hadn't prepared for was this: raw admission, genuine remorse, someone taking full responsibility. Without excuses or deflections. "What happened to Morrison?" he asked. "I fired him 6 months after you left." Quietly, with a generous severance package and an NDA that kept the whole thing out of the press. He'd gotten bolder, sloppier. The evidence became impossible to ignore. Sophie's mouth twisted bitterly. I did exactly what I should have done when you first brought me the report, but I was 6 months too late, and it cost you everything. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Morrison had continued stealing for 6 months. After Benjamin's firing, emboldened by getting away with it, stealing more money while Benjamin lost his career and his reputation. How much, he asked. Total? Just over $2 million. Most of it recovered from accounts Morrison hadn't had time to liquidate, but enough missing that we had to settle several client lawsuits. Sophie's voice was flat, professional. The company survived, but barely. And none of that would have happened if I'd listened to you in the first place. Benjamin stared out the window at the street where people walked by with normal problems and uncomplicated lives. $2 million. His entire career destroyed to cover up $2 million in theft, money that had been stolen anyway, clients who had been defrauded anyway, lawsuits that had happened anyway. I lost everything, he said quietly. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Emma's mother used the whole mess against me in the custody hearings. Said I was unstable, unreliable. I nearly lost my daughter. I know. Sophie's voice cracked slightly. I've read the court records, the news articles, the blacklist. Our EPORTS that followed you to every job interview. I know what we did to you, and I know it was unforgivable. Then why are you here? Benjamin asked. What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Absolution? Sophie met his eyes directly. I want to make it right. I want to fix what I broke, as much as that's still possible. You can't give me back 3 years of my life. You can't give me back the nights I worked double shifts to make rent, or the times Emma asked why Daddy couldn't afford the fins her friends had, or the way I felt when I had to explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes good people get punished for doing the right thing. No, Sophie said simply. I can't give you back any of that. But I can give you back your reputation. I can give you back your career. I can make sure everyone knows what really happened and who was really to blame. Benjamin felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot of anger and resentment he'd been carrying for 3 years. It was what he'd wanted to hear for so long that he'd stopped believing it would ever happen. And what would that cost you? He asked. Sophie smiled, and for the first time since she'd walked into his apartment, it was a real smile, not a corporate one. Everything, my reputation. Probably my job, definitely my standing in the business community. When the truth comes out about how I handled your case, I'll be finished. And you're willing to do that? You saved my daughters, Sophie said simply. You risked your life for 2 girls you didn't even know, without hesitation, without asking. What was in it for you? After what I did to you, you had every reason to walk away, to let someone else handle the rescue. But you didn't. You showed me what integrity actually looks like, and now I have to live with mine. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of confession and possibility settling between them. Around them, the coffee shop continued its normal rhythms. People living their ordinary lives while 2 people tried to figure out how to rebuild something that had been broken for years. There's something else, Sophie said eventually. Something I need to tell you about that night. Benjamin looked up from his coffee. What? Lily and Rose. They won't stop talking about you. Not just the rescue, but you. The way you spoke to them, the way you made them feel safe. They want to meet you properly, to thank you themselves. Sophie hesitated. They don't know you used to work for my company. They don't know about any of the history. To them, you're just the hero who saved their lives. Benjamin thought of Emma, of how she'd reacted to Sophie's visit, the easy way. His daughter had accepted kindness from a stranger. How old are they? 15. Sophomores at Ashford High. Straight A students, academic decathlon team, the whole thing. Sophie's voice softened with maternal pride. They're good girls, kind girls. They get that from their father. Their father? My ex-husband, David. We divorced 2 years ago amicably. He's a pediatric surgeon, spends most of his time at the hospital saving lives. Sophie's expression grew complicated. He's actually a lot like you, in some ways. The kind of man who does the right thing, even when it's difficult. Benjamin heard the subtext, that Sophie had a type, that she was drawn to men with integrity, even when that integrity made her own compromises harder to live with. Ms. Lombardi, he began. Sophie, she corrected. After everything we've talked about today, I think we can use first names. Sophie, what exactly are you proposing? You said you wanted to make things right, but what does that actually look like? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed him a document that had been prepared by her legal team. Benjamin skimmed it quickly, his analytical mind parsing the corporate language and legal specifics. It was a comprehensive vindication, public acknowledgement of his innocence, restoration of his employment record, financial compensation for lost wages, and a personal recommendation that would open doors throughout the industry. This goes public tomorrow, Sophie said. Press release, internal company memo, personal statements from me taking full responsibility. By the end of the week, everyone in the industry will know that Benjamin Romano was right, that he was wrongfully terminated, and that anyone who blacklisted him made a serious mistake. Benjamin stared at the document, seeing his professional resurrection laid out in legal terminology and corporate letterhead. It was everything he'd dreamed of for 3 years, delivered by the woman who had destroyed him in the first place. Why now? He asked. What changed? Sophie was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed Lily and Rose in their hospital beds, smiling despite their bandages and bruises, holding a drawing they'd made. Together, the drawing showed a man carrying 2 girls to safety, surrounded by flames and emergency vehicles. At the bottom, in careful teenage handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for saving us." This changed, Sophie said simply. Seeing my daughters alive because of your courage, while knowing that I'd tried to destroy you for having that same courage 3 years ago, I couldn't live with the contradiction anymore. Benjamin looked at the photograph, then at Sophie then. Back at the legal document that represented his vindication. For the first time in 3 years, the future felt like something he could choose, rather than something that was happening to him. I want to meet them, he said. Your daughters, if they want to meet me, I'd like that. Sophie's smile was radiant. They would love that. They've been asking every day. Benjamin folded the document and slid it across the table back to Sophie. Make it public, all of it. Whatever it costs you, do it. The truth should have come out 3 years ago. Sophie nodded, accepting the document back like it was a sacred trust. Thank you, Benjamin, for giving me the chance to finally do the right thing. As they left the coffee shop and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, Benjamin felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for vindication or career restoration, but for the possibility that some mistakes could be fixed, that some wounds could heal, and that sometimes the people who hurt you were also the ones brave enough to make it right. What he didn't know, as Sophie climbed into her silver BMW and drove back toward her corporate world, was that she'd left out one crucial detail from their conversation. The part about how she'd felt when she saw his face in the news footage, when she realized that the man who'd saved her daughters was the same man she'd been thinking about for 3 years, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her professional life. And the part about how, sitting across from him in that coffee shop, she'd realized that fixing her mistake might be the least complicated part of what was developing between them. The text message arrived on a Saturday morning while Benjamin was making pancakes for Emma, flour dusting his hands and the smell of vanilla filling their small kitchen. The number was unfamiliar, but the words made his heart skip unexpectedly. Hi, this is Lily. Mom gave me your number. Rose and I were wondering if you'd like to come to dinner tomorrow. We promise we're better cooks than we are academic decathlon competitors. Lily, the one you carried out first. Benjamin stared at the phone, syrup dripping forgotten from the spatula in his other hand. 2 weeks had passed since his coffee shop confrontation with Sophie. 2 weeks during which the corporate machinery had been grinding toward his public vindication. The press release was scheduled for Monday. He'd seen the drafts, approved the language, steeled himself for the media attention that would follow. But this message was different, personal. 2 teenage girls who wanted to thank their rescuer. Over homemade dinner. "Daddy, the pancakes are smoking," Emma observed with the calm practicality of someone accustomed to her father's occasional distraction. Benjamin flipped the pancake, only slightly burnt, and typed back, "I'd be honored. Can I bring anything? And yes, I remember you. You asked if your sister was okay." The response came almost immediately, "Just yourself. Mom's making her famous lasagna, and Rose is handling dessert. Fair warning, she's been practicing tiramisu. For 3 days. Our kitchen looks like a war zone." That evening, Benjamin found himself standing outside a house in Maplewood Heights, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were manicured by professional services and driveways were wide enough for multiple luxury cars. Sophie's house was elegant, but not ostentatious, colonial style with warm yellow siding, a wraparound porch, and windows that glowed with welcoming light against the autumn dusk. Emma had wanted to come. But Benjamin had explained this was something he needed to do, alone first. Mrs. Chun had nodded approvingly when he'd told her about the invitation, saying something about how healing required courage from everyone involved. Sophie answered the door wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "Benjamin, thank you so much for coming. The girls have been cooking all day." She led him through a house that managed to be both expensive and comfortable, hardwood floors covered with Persian rugs, built-in bookshelves filled with novels and textbooks, family photos covering every available surface. It was the kind of home that suggested success, but also warmth, money that had been spent on creating a sanctuary rather than displaying status. "Dad's here," Sophie called toward the kitchen, and Benjamin heard the sound of chairs scraping and feet moving quickly. Across tile. Lily appeared first, and Benjamin's breath caught slightly. She was beautiful in the way 15-year-olds could be. All long limbs and bright eyes, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders. But what struck him most was how alive she looked, how different from the still, pale girl he'd carried. From the smoke-filled bus. "You're taller than I thought you'd be," she said, extending her hand with the formal politeness of someone who'd been raised with good manners. Then her composure cracked and she smiled, radiant, grateful, utterly genuine. "Thank you. I mean, really. Thank you for everything." Rose appeared beside her sister, identical in features but different in energy. Quieter, more thoughtful, studying Benjamin with curious intelligence. "You have kind eyes," she said simply. "I remember thinking that, even though I was pretty out of it. You told me my sister was okay, and that you were going to take care of us." Benjamin felt his throat tighten. "I remember you too. Both of you. You were incredibly brave that night." "We were terrified," Lily said with a laugh, "but you made us feel safe." Dinner was a revelation. Benjamin had expected awkwardness, the stilted conversation that often happened when tragedy brought strangers together. Instead, he found himself at a table with 3 remarkable women who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him. Not as a hero or a news story, but as a person. The girls asked about Emma, about his work, about what he liked to read and whether he'd ever been skydiving, Lily's current obsession, or to Italy, Rose's dream destination. Sophie mostly listened, occasionally adding context or asking follow-up questions, but Benjamin could feel her watching him, studying the way he interacted with her daughters. "Mom says you used to work with computers," Rose said over dessert. Tiramisu that was actually quite good despite the kitchen casualties it had apparently claimed. Do you miss it? Benjamin glanced at Sophie, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The girls didn't know about the history between their parents, about the professional destruction and corporate cover-ups. To them, he was simply someone who'd moved from office work to warehouse shifts, probably for personal reasons they were too polite to probe. I do miss it sometimes, Benjamin said carefully. I liked solving problems, finding patterns in data that other people missed. But life has a way of taking you in directions you don't expect. Like becoming a hero? Lily asked. I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone should do when people need help. That's exactly what heroes say, Rose observed. Real heroes anyway. The fake ones are always talking about how heroic they are. After dinner, the girls insisted on showing Benjamin their academic decathlon trophies, their art projects, their college prep books. Sophie followed at a distance, occasionally adding maternal commentary or gentle corrections when the girls' enthusiasm outpaced accuracy. They love you, she said quietly when Lily and Rose had run upstairs to find a photo from their last debate. Tournament. They're amazing, Benjamin replied. You should be proud. I am. But I'm also terrified every day that I'm not enough for them, that I'm not giving them what they need. Sophie's voice carried the weight that all single parents knew, the constant fear of inadequacy despite best efforts. You're giving them everything, Benjamin said simply. I can see it in how they talk to you, how comfortable they are in their own home. They know they're loved. Sophie looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You understand that, don't you? The weight of being everything to someone small and precious. Emma's the best thing I've ever done, Benjamin said. And the scariest responsibility I'll ever have. When Lily and Rose returned with their photo albums and debate team certificates, Benjamin found himself genuinely engaged in their academic achievements, asking questions about their research topics and competition strategies. These were brilliant. Girls, not just smart but intellectually curious, passionate about learning in a way that reminded him of his own younger self. What do you want to study in college? He asked. Lily wants to be a lawyer, Rose said. She likes arguing with people. I like defending people who need defending, Lily corrected with dignity. There's a difference. And I want to study psychology, Rose added. I'm interested in how people think, why they make the decisions they do. Benjamin glanced at Sophie, who was smiling with the complicated pride of a mother watching her children reveal themselves to be the people she'd hoped they would become. As the evening wound down, Benjamin found himself reluctant to leave. The house felt warm, alive in a way his small apartment couldn't match. Not because of the money or the space, but because of the people in it. The sense of family that had been built through years of shared meals and inside jokes and unconditional love. Thank you for tonight, he said as Sophie walked into the door. This meant more than you know. Thank you for giving them the chance to say thank you properly, Sophie replied. They've been carrying that need around for weeks. Benjamin paused on the porch, looking back at the house where lights were still on upstairs, where two remarkable girls were probably staying up too late discussing the evening. Sophie, can I ask you something? Of course. When all this comes out publicly, when people know what really happened 3 years ago, how do you think that's going to affect them? Lily and Rose? Sophie considered the question seriously. They're going to find out their mother made a terrible mistake that hurt a good person. They're going to have questions about integrity and corporate responsibility and whether success is worth compromising your values. She smiled sadly. But maybe that's a conversation we need to have. Maybe it's time they understood that their mother isn't perfect, but she's trying to do better. Benjamin nodded, understanding the courage it took to accept that your children might see your flaws, might have to grapple with your mistakes as part of their own moral development. For what it's worth, he said, you're raising incredible young women. Whatever mistakes you made in the past, You're getting this part right." Sophie's eyes brightened with tears she didn't let fall. "Thank you, Benjamin. That means everything." As Benjamin drove home through the quiet streets of Maplewood Heights, he found himself thinking not about vindication or career restoration, but about the sound of genuine laughter around a dinner table, about two girls who saw the world as a place full of possibilities, and about a woman who was brave enough to risk everything to make amends for past mistakes. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Rose says to tell you that you're welcome for dinner anytime. I say you're officially part of our family now, whether you like it or not. Sleep well. Ellen Barr." Benjamin smiled, saving the message before pulling into his apartment complex parking lot. Tomorrow the press release would go public and his professional resurrection would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, he fell asleep feeling like he belonged somewhere beyond the small circle of himself and Emma and their carefully constructed survival. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability, like a storm everyone could see coming, but no one could prevent. Benjamin woke before his alarm, his body refusing to sleep through what might be the most important day of his professional life. He made coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully, and then sat at their small kitchen table with his laptop, waiting for the world to change. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Lombardi Enterprises issued a press release that would rewrite 3 years of Benjamin Romano's history. The headline was direct, unambiguous. Lombardi Enterprises issues public apology and vindication for wrongfully terminated employee. Benjamin read the statement with the careful attention of someone examining a legal document that would determine his future. Sophie had kept her word completely. The language was clear, comprehensive, and devastating to her own reputation. She took full responsibility for the wrongful termination, acknowledged that Benjamin's fraud allegations had been accurate, and revealed that the real perpetrator had been quietly terminated 6 months later. Financial compensation was mentioned, though not the specific amount. Most importantly, the statement made it clear that Benjamin Romano was a man of integrity who had been punished for doing the right thing. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. By 10 a.m., Benjamin's phone was buzzing every few minutes with calls from reporters, job recruiters, and former colleagues who had suddenly remembered his existence. The story had legs. Corporate whistleblower vindicated. Hero saves CEO's children. David versus Goliath narrative with a fairy tale twist. It was the kind of story that media outlets loved because it had everything: injustice, redemption, corporate accountability, and genuine human drama. Benjamin turned off his phone after the 15th call and focused on getting Emma ready for school, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine while his professional world exploded around him. Mrs. Shun appeared at his door with breakfast pastries and knowing looks. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling Emma at the table with orange juice and a chocolate croissant. "I don't know yet," Benjamin admitted. "This is what I wanted for 3 years, but now that it's happening, now you're scared it might disappear again," Mrs. Shun finished gently. "That's natural. Trust takes time to rebuild, even trust in good fortune." Emma looked up from her croissant. "Daddy, why are so many people calling?" Mrs. Martinez said there were reporters downstairs asking questions about you. Benjamin knelt beside his daughter's chair, choosing his words carefully. "Remember how I told you that sometimes good people get in trouble for doing the right thing? Well, some important people finally figured out that I was telling the truth all along. So now everyone wants to know the story." Emma considered this with the seriousness she applied to all moral questions. "Are you happy they know you were right?" "Yes," Benjamin said, surprised by how true it was. "I am happy about that." After dropping Emma at school, with extra instructions for Mrs. Rodriguez to call if any reporters showed up, Benjamin drove to Cromwell Industrial Packaging for what might be his last shift. Word had already spread through the warehouse. Rico met him at the security desk with a newspaper folded to show Benjamin's photo above a story headlined "Local Hero Was Corporate Whistleblower." "Look at you, famous twice in 1 month," Rico said with a grin. "Though I got to say, this explains a lot about why a guy with your education was working our shift." "Just want to finish out my responsibilities," Benjamin said. "Give proper notice. Man, you could walk out right now and nobody would blame you. You got job offers yet?" Benjamin thought of the voicemails he'd been avoiding, the recruiting firms that had blacklisted him 3 years ago and were now eager to represent him. A few. By lunchtime, Benjamin had received 17 job offers, including 3 from companies that had refused to interview him just months earlier. The hypocrisy was staggering but not surprising. Corporate America loved a redemption story, especially when it made them look progressive and forgiving. The salary figures being discussed were double what he'd made in his previous position. Compensation for lost years wrapped in signing bonuses and executive perks. But the call that mattered most came at 2 p.m. from a number he didn't recognize, but a voice he'd been hoping to hear. "Benjamin, it's Sophie. Are you somewhere you can talk?" Benjamin stepped outside into the warehouse parking lot, away from the constant hum of machinery and conversation. "I'm here. How are you holding up?" Sophie's laugh was strained. "I've had better days. The board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. My resignation letter is drafted and ready to submit." "Sophie, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. This was always going to be the price, and I'm prepared to pay it." Her voice was steady, resolved. "But that's not why I'm calling. I wanted you to know that Lily and Rose read the news this morning. They have questions." Benjamin felt his stomach drop. "Are they okay?" "They're processing." Rose said she's not surprised. She always thought there was more to your story than working in a warehouse. Lily is angry, but not at you. She's furious that her mother could have been part of something so unjust. Sophie's voice cracked slightly. "She asked me how I could look at myself in the mirror, knowing what I'd done to someone who saved their lives." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I was a coward who chose convenience over courage, and that it took seeing real integrity in action to understand how far I'd fallen." Sophie paused. "They want to see you, tonight if possible. They want to hear your side of the story directly." Benjamin looked up at the gray autumn sky, weighing the weight of responsibility against the pull of connection. These girls had been through enough trauma without having to grapple with their mother's corporate failures, but they deserved honesty about the world they were inheriting. "Of course," he said. "What time?" That evening, Benjamin found himself back in the Maplewood Heights house that was beginning to feel familiar, sitting across from Lily and Rose in the living room while Sophie retreated to the kitchen to give them privacy. The girls looked older somehow, as if the morning's revelations had aged them in the way that understanding adult complexities always did. "We read everything," Lily said without preamble. "Every article, every statement, every timeline. Mom destroyed your career because you told the truth about someone stealing money." "That's an oversimplification," Benjamin said gently. "Your mother was in an impossible situation." "No." Rose's voice was quiet but firm. "She wasn't. She had a choice between protecting her company's reputation and protecting what was right. She chose wrong." Benjamin looked between these two remarkable girls, seeing Sophie's intelligence and determination reflected in their faces, but also something harder, the beginning of the moral complexity that would define their adult lives. "Yes," he said simply, "she chose wrong. But people make mistakes, even good people, especially when they're scared or under pressure." "How can you defend her?" Lily demanded. "After what she did to you, how can you sit here and make excuses?" Benjamin leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. "Because 3 years ago, I thought the world was divided into good people and bad people, and that good people always did the right thing. I was wrong. The world is messier than that. Your mother made a terrible decision, but she's spending everything she has to fix it. That takes a different kind of courage. She's losing her job, Rose said. The news said the board is probably going to force her out. And she knew that would happen when she decided to tell the truth. She's sacrificing her career, her reputation, everything she's built, because she finally understood that some things matter more than success. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing. You really forgive her? Benjamin thought about forgiveness, about the weight he'd been carrying for 3 years, and how much lighter it had felt since that coffee shop conversation. I'm learning to. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a choice you make every day, sometimes every hour. But yes, I forgive her. Why? Rose asked. Because holding on to anger was killing me slowly, and because she saved my daughters. Benjamin smiled. Oh, and because she's raising 2 incredible young women, who care enough about justice to be furious when they see it denied. Sophie appeared in the doorway, hesitant. How are we doing in here? Lily looked at her mother for a long moment, then crossed the room and hugged her fiercely. I'm still angry, she said into Sophie's shoulder. But I love you, and I'm proud that you're trying to make it right. Rose joined them, creating a knot of family reconciliation that made Benjamin's chest tight with emotion. We're going to get through this together, Rose said simply. All of us. Sophie looked at Benjamin over her daughters' heads, her eyes bright with gratitude and something deeper. All of us, she repeated softly. Later, after the girls had gone upstairs to finish homework, Sophie and Benjamin sat on the front porch in the cool evening air, watching the lights come on in neighboring houses. The board meeting is tomorrow, Sophie said. By Friday, I'll probably be unemployed for the first time in 20 years. Scared? Benjamin asked. Sophie considered the question. Terrified. But also relieved. I've been carrying the weight of what I did to you for 3 years. At least now it's out in the open. What will you do? I don't know. Maybe consulting, maybe teaching. Maybe something completely different, she smiled. I hear the night shift at packaging warehouses teaches you a lot about what really matters. Benjamin laughed, surprised by how natural it felt to share humor with this woman, who had been his enemy, and was becoming something else entirely. It does, though I wouldn't recommend it as a career plan. Benjamin, Sophie said, her voice growing. Serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you think we can really move past this, all of it? The history, the hurt, the power imbalance? Can we build something real from the wreckage of what I broke? Benjamin looked at her, really looked, seeing not the polished executive who had destroyed his life, but the woman who was risking everything to repair it, the mother who was teaching her daughters that courage sometimes meant admitting you were wrong. The person who was brave enough to ask hard questions about forgiveness and second chances. I think, he said carefully, that some of the best things are built on foundations that had to be broken first, cleared away so something stronger could take their place. Sophie's smile was radiant, hopeful in a way that made Benjamin's heart skip unexpectedly. I'd like to try, she said. If you're willing. As Benjamin drove home that night, his phone finally turned back on and buzzing with dozens of messages about job offers and interview requests. He realized that vindication felt different than he'd expected. It wasn't the triumphant satisfaction he'd imagined, but something quieter and more substantial, the relief of being seen clearly, of having his truth acknowledged, of finally being able to move forward instead of constantly looking back. Corporate world wanted Benjamin Romano, the vindicated whistleblower, the hero with the compelling comeback story. But as he pulled into his apartment complex and saw Mrs. Chun waiting on her balcony to hear how his day had gone, he realized what he wanted was simpler: to be Benjamin Romano, the good man, the loving father, the person who showed up when people needed help. Everything else was just details. Thanksgiving arrived 6 weeks after the vindication, bringing with it a crisp November. Mourning and the kind of domestic chaos that only happened when two families attempted to merge their holiday traditions on short notice. Benjamin stood in Sophie's kitchen, attempting to coordinate the timing of 3 different side dishes while Emma and Rose decorated place cards at the dining room table, and Lily argued with Sophie about the proper way to baste a turkey. "You're supposed to turn the temperature down after the first hour," Lily insisted, armed with a cookbook and the confidence of someone who had watched exactly 2 YouTube tutorials. "I've been making this turkey for 15 years, Sophie replied, with maternal patience. "Trust me on this one." Benjamin smiled as he stirred cranberry sauce, marveling at how quickly this had become normal, the easy banter, the comfortable chaos, the sense of belonging in someone else's kitchen. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Sophie's resignation from Lombardi Enterprises, Benjamin's transition to a senior analyst position at Morrison Tech Solutions. The irony of the company name wasn't lost on either of them. And the gradual weaving together of 2 families learning to become one. It hadn't been without challenges. Emma had struggled initially with sharing her father's attention, while Lily and Rose had needed time to process their mother's romantic involvement with the man she'd wrongfully fired. But children were remarkably adaptable when the adults in their lives were happy, and all 3 girls had eventually embraced the expanded family constellation with enthusiasm. "Dad, can you help us with the math on this seating chart?" Rose called from the dining room. "We're trying to figure out optimal conversation flow based on personality compatibility." Leave it to Rose to turn Thanksgiving dinner into a social psychology experiment, Sophie said fondly. Benjamin joined the girls at the dining room table, which was covered with charts, colored pencils, and place cards featuring hand-drawn turkeys with surprisingly sophisticated artistic detail. Emma had thrown herself into the project with the intensity she brought to all creative endeavors, while Rose approached it with scientific methodology, and Lily provided running commentary on everyone else's artistic choices. "We thought you should sit between Mom and Emma," Rose explained, showing him her carefully plotted diagram. "You're good at managing competing conversational interests. And Grandpa David should sit next to Lily, because she likes to debate politics and he never backs down from an argument," Emma added, "even when he's wrong about recycling." Benjamin looked up at Sophie, who was pretending not to listen while she prepared stuffing. The decision to invite David, Sophie's ex-husband, and the girl's father had been Sophie's idea, part of her ongoing effort to model healthy family dynamics for all the children involved. Benjamin had been nervous about meeting the man who had once been married to the woman he was falling in love with, but David had turned out to be gracious, intelligent, and genuinely grateful that Benjamin had saved his daughter's lives. "What about Mrs. Chun?" Benjamin asked. "Where does she fit in this complex social architecture?" "Next to me," Emma said immediately. "She promised to tell me more stories about when you were young and stupid." "I was never young and stupid," Benjamin protested. "Everyone is young and stupid sometimes," Lily observed. "It's how you learn to be old and wise." The doorbell rang, and Benjamin went to answer it, finding David on the porch with an enormous flower arrangement and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Benjamin used to make in a week. He was a tall man with graying temples and the kind of easy confidence that came from saving children's lives for a living. "Benjamin, good to see you again," David said, shaking hands with genuine warmth. "Sophie tells me you're settling into the new job well." "It's been an adjustment," Benjamin admitted, leading David into the house. "Going from night shifts to boardroom presentations isn't exactly seamless. But you're happy?" Benjamin glanced around the house that had become his second home, listening to the sound of his daughter laughing with Sophie's girls while Sophie orchestrated the final preparations for their first holiday together as an extended family. "Yeah," he said. "I'm happy." Mrs. Chun arrived shortly after, bearing her famous green bean casserole and wearing her best dress, a navy blue creation with tiny pearl buttons that she'd been saving for special occasions. Emma immediately attached herself to the elderly woman's arm, chattering about the place, cards and the scientific seating arrangement, and how her daddy was learning to make Sophie's grandmother's stuffing recipe. "You look good," Mrs. Chun told Benjamin quietly while Emma was distracted by Lily's explanation of cranberry sauce chemistry. "Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," Benjamin admitted. "Like I can finally breathe properly again." Dinner was a revelation. In controlled chaos, David and Lily did indeed debate politics, specifically environmental policy and the economics of renewable energy, while Rose peppered David with questions about pediatric surgery techniques. Emma appointed herself the official conversation moderator, ensuring that everyone got equal speaking time and that no one dominated the discussion. Sophie sat at the head of the table, presiding over the organized mayhem with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully orchestrated a complex social experiment. She looked beautiful in a deep burgundy dress that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. But more than that, she looked content. The corporate stress lines that had been etched around her eyes were fading, replaced by laugh lines and the kind of relaxation that came from no longer carrying the weight of compromise and moral ambiguity. "I have an announcement," Sophie said during dessert, raising her wine glass with the ceremonial gravity of someone about to share important news. "I've been offered a position." The table fell silent, everyone turning to look at her expectantly. "The State Attorney General's office wants me to head up their new Corporate Accountability Division, investigating financial crimes, pursuing whistleblower cases, basically doing everything I should have been doing 3 years ago, but with the authority to actually make a difference." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. David raised his glass in toast, the girls cheered, Mrs. Chun nodded approvingly, and Benjamin felt his chest tighten with pride and something deeper, the realization that Sophie had found a way to transform her mistakes into purpose. "There's one catch," Sophie continued, her eyes finding Benjamin's across the table. "It's based in the state capital, about 2 hours from here." Benjamin felt the table's attention shift to him, everyone suddenly aware that this announcement had implications beyond Sophie's career trajectory. Emma's expression grew worried, while Lily and Rose looked between their parents with the anxiety of children who had experienced enough family disruption for one lifetime. "That's a wonderful opportunity," Benjamin said carefully. "You'll be amazing at that job." "I haven't accepted it yet," Sophie said quietly. "There are other factors to consider." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Benjamin could feel the unresolved tension humming underneath the holiday pleasantries. After dinner, while the girls were in the living room arguing about what movie to watch, and Mrs. Chun was helping David with dishes, Benjamin and Sophie found themselves alone on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the November chill. "Tell me what you're thinking," Sophie said without preamble. Benjamin was quiet for a moment, watching his breath mist in the cold air. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago, the idea of you moving 2 hours away would have been irrelevant to my life, and now it feels like losing something I just found." Benjamin turned to face her directly. "But I'm also thinking that you've spent 3 years rebuilding your integrity, and this job is the culmination of that. You can't turn it down because of a relationship that's still figuring itself out." Sophie reached for his hand, her fingers cold but sure. "What if I don't want to figure it out from 2 hours away? Then we figure out how to make it work," Benjamin said simply. "Emma and I could relocate. My new company has offices there, and Emma's young enough that changing schools won't derail her life. You'd do that? Uproot everything you've built here?" Benjamin looked through the window at Emma, who was curled up between Lily and Rose on the couch, all three of them absorbed in animated debate about their movie selection. This was what family looked like, he realized, not the traditional nuclear structure he'd grown up expecting, but something messier and more complex and infinitely more real. Sophie, 3 years ago I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Career, reputation, future. All of it gone because I tried to do the right thing. But I was wrong. What mattered was Emma, and making sure she grew up knowing that her father was someone she could be proud of. Everything else was just stuff. Sophie's eyes were bright in the porch light, reflecting something that might have been tears or might have been hope. Now I have more than I ever imagined possible, Benjamin continued. Emma has sisters who adore her. I have work that feels meaningful again. And I have you, brilliant, complicated, courageous you, who risked everything to make amends for a mistake and ended up giving me a family I didn't know I wanted. Benjamin. So yes, he said, squeezing her hand. If taking that job means relocating, we'll relocate. If it means commuting, we'll commute. If it means figuring out how to blend 2 households and 3 children and 2 careers and all the messy complications that come with trying to build something real and lasting, then that's what we'll do. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light. Then she smiled, the real smile that he'd learned to distinguish from her corporate smile, the one that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. There's something else about the job offer, she said. They want me to bring someone with me. A senior analyst who understands corporate financial structures and has experience with whistleblower cases. Someone with unimpeachable integrity and a reputation for doing the right thing even when it costs him everything. Benjamin blinked, processing the implication. Sophie, are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Professional and personal. The chance to spend our careers making sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Benjamin felt something shift in his chest, the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Not just vindication, not just restoration, but transformation. The chance to turn his worst experience into his life's purpose. The girls will love the state capitol, he said. Better museums, more cultural opportunities. Emma's been wanting to take violin lessons. Sophie laughed, the sound bright and musical against the quiet evening. Is that a yes? Benjamin stood up, pulling Sophie to her feet and into his arms, holding her close against the November chill and the weight of possibility. That's a yes to everything. The job, the partnership, the complicated family, the scary future, all of it. As they stood together on the porch, they could hear the sounds of their children inside, Emma's laugh, Lily's mock indignation at some perceived injustice in the movie selection process, Rose's patient mediation of the dispute. Mrs. Chun's voice drifted through the window as she told David some embarrassing story about Benjamin's younger years, followed by David's appreciative laughter. It wasn't the life Benjamin had planned. Wasn't the neat narrative arc he'd imagined when he was younger and thought he understood how the world worked. But it was better than anything he could have planned, messier, more complicated, more real, and infinitely more precious because it had been built from the wreckage of everything he'd thought he wanted. Sophie pulled back slightly to look at him, her face serious despite her smile. Are you sure about this, all of it? Because once we do this, there's no going back to simple. Benjamin looked through the window one more time, taking in the scene of organized domestic chaos that had somehow become his definition of home. Emma was demonstrating some complex hand gesture to Lily and Rose, probably related to a story about school or friends or the grand adventure of being 8 years old. Mrs. Chun was laughing at something David had said, her face creased with the kind of joy that came from seeing the people she loved finding happiness. Simple is overrated, Benjamin said, turning back to Sophie. I'll take complicated and real over simple and empty any day. Sophie rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sure and full of promise. Then let's go tell our family we're moving to the state capitol. As they walked back into the house together, ready to announce the next chapter of their complicated, beautiful, imperfect life together, Benjamin realized that sometimes the best stories were the ones that started with everything falling apart and ended with Something better than you'd ever dared to imagine rising from the pieces. The snow was falling softly on Christmas Eve morning when Benjamin found himself standing in Sophie's kitchen, watching her make hot chocolate for the girls, who were somewhere upstairs wrapping last-minute presents and arguing about ribbon colors. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and Christmas music played quietly from the speakers Sophie had installed in every room, a luxury that still felt foreign to someone who had spent 3 years measuring every expense against rent money. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the Thanksgiving announcement, since they decided to relocate together and build something that resembled a traditional family structure. The state capital had welcomed them with surprising warmth. Benjamin had thrown himself into the corporate accountability work with the passion of someone finally using his skills for something meaningful, while Sophie had proven to be a formidable prosecutor of financial crimes. The girls had adapted with the resilience of youth, making new friends while maintaining their close bond with each other and their expanding sense of family. But standing in the kitchen on Christmas Eve morning, Benjamin realized that all the practical arrangements, the house they'd bought together, the schools they'd researched, the careful coordination of custody schedules with David, were just infrastructure for something deeper that had been growing between him and Sophie. "You're thinking very seriously for someone who's supposed to be on vacation," Sophie observed, handing him a mug topped with marshmallows that Emma had specifically requested. "I've been thinking about timing," Benjamin said, accepting the hot chocolate and trying to find the courage he'd had when running into burning buses but seemed to have misplaced when it came to matters of the heart. Timing for what? Benjamin set down his mug and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that had been burning a hole there for the past 2 weeks. Sophie's eyes widened slightly, her hands stilling on the counter. "Benjamin, I know this isn't how these things usually happen," he said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could lose his nerve. "I know we've been practical about everything else, the move, the jobs, blending the families, making sure the girls were settled before we made any big changes. But Sophie, I can't wait for the perfect moment anymore." Sophie was staring at the box like it might contain either salvation or disaster. "The girls are upstairs. They could come down any minute." "Good," Benjamin said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "They should be here for this." "They're part of what I'm asking." He opened the box to reveal a ring that wasn't flashy or expensive. He'd learned that Sophie valued meaning over display, but was beautiful in its simplicity. A single diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and timeless. "Sophie Lombardi," he said, his voice growing steadier as he found the words that had been building in his heart for months. 3 years ago, you made a mistake that cost me everything I thought I wanted. 6 months ago, you gave me everything I never knew I needed." Sophie's eyes were bright with tears she wasn't trying to hide. "You gave me back my reputation, my career, my sense of purpose. But more than that, you gave me a family. You gave Emma sisters who adore her. You gave me work that means something. And you gave me the chance to love someone who's brave enough to admit when she's wrong and strong. Enough to make it right. Make it right." Benjamin knelt on the kitchen floor, the ring box open between them like a promise. "I'm not asking you to marry the man whose life you destroyed. I'm asking you to marry the man who became himself because you had the courage to fix what you'd broken. Will you marry me?" Sophie was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her mouth. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps and muffled voices. The girls, probably wondering why the house had gone so quiet. "Yes," Sophie whispered, then louder, "Yes, Benjamin. Yes to all of it." As Benjamin slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma appeared at the kitchen doorway followed by Lily and Rose, all 3 girls taking in the scene with the wide-eyed wonder of children witnessing something momentous. "Are you guys getting married?" Emma asked, her voice pitched somewhere between excitement and concern. "We are," Sophie said, turning to include all 3 girls in the moment. "If that's okay with you." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Emma launched herself at Benjamin with enough force to nearly knock him over, while Lily and Rose surrounded Sophie in a group hug that dissolved into happy tears and excited chatter about wedding plans and dress colors and whether they could all be in the wedding party later. After the girls had called David to share the news and Mrs. Chun had been summoned for an impromptu celebration dinner, Benjamin and Sophie found themselves alone on the front porch, watching the snow continue to fall over their new neighborhood. "Are you sure about this?" Sophie asked, her engagement ring catching the light from the Christmas decorations that lined their street. "Marriage is complicated under the best circumstances, and our circumstances are perfect," Benjamin interrupted. "Complicated and messy. And real and perfect." Sophie smiled, leaning against him in the cold air. "I love you, Benjamin Romano. I love your integrity and your kindness and the way you show up for people, even when it costs you everything." "I love you too," Benjamin replied, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones like warmth. "I love your courage and your fierce protection of the people you care about, and the way you're teaching our girls that it's never too late to do the right thing." As they stood together watching the snow fall on Christmas Eve, Benjamin realized that this was what redemption actually looked like, not the dramatic vindication he'd imagined, but the quiet joy of building something beautiful from the pieces of what had been broken. Tomorrow would bring wedding plans and the ongoing work of blending families and careers. But tonight there was just this: love freely given, commitment freely chosen, and the promise that some stories that begin with loss can end with everything you never dared to hope for. 2 years later, Benjamin Romano stood in the conference room of the State Attorney General's office, watching Sophie present their latest case findings to a room full of federal investigators. She moved with the confident authority of someone who had found her true calling, gesturing toward charts and financial documents that told the story of a pharmaceutical company's systematic fraud, the kind of case that would have been buried under corporate pressure just a few years ago. "The whistleblower came forward 6 months ago," Sophie was saying, her voice clear and professional. "Our investigation confirms that the allegations are not only credible, but represent a pattern of misconduct that goes back nearly a decade." Benjamin smiled from his seat at the conference table, remembering another whistleblower from another time, when truth-telling was punished rather than protected. Their division had become a model for other states, a place where people could come forward without fear of retaliation, where integrity was rewarded rather than destroyed. After the meeting, Benjamin and Sophie walked together toward the parking garage, their footsteps echoing in the underground space that had become as familiar as their own home. "Good presentation," Benjamin said. "Though I think Agent Martinez is going to have his work cut out for him with that pharmaceutical case. He can handle it. Besides, we gave him everything he needs to build an airtight case." Sophie paused beside her car, keys in hand. "Speaking of which, did you see the email from Senator Williams' office? They want us to testify at the corporate accountability hearings next month." "Congressional testimony," Benjamin mused. "5 years ago, I was invisible. Now senators want my opinion on federal policy." "You were never invisible," Sophie said gently. "You were just waiting for the right people to see you." The drive home took them through the heart of the state capitol, past the university where Rose was now a freshman studying psychology, past the Performing Arts Center where Lily had just been accepted into a summer theater program. Emma was 13 now, tall and confident and passionate about environmental science, following in the footsteps of her adopted sisters by excelling academically while maintaining the kind heart that had always been her defining characteristic. Their house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, a colonial-style home with enough bedrooms for everyone, and a backyard where Mrs. Chun, who had moved with them, claiming she was too old to break in new neighbors, maintained a garden that supplied vegetables for half the block. It was the kind of house Benjamin had driven past during his warehouse years, never imagining he might someday belong in such a place. "Mom, Dad, you're home." Emma's voice carried from the kitchen, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. She appeared in the doorway with flour in her hair and excitement in her eyes. "Mrs. Chun taught me how to make dumplings, and I only burned the first batch." Benjamin caught Emma in a hug, marveling at how naturally Dad had evolved to include both him and Sophie in Emma's vocabulary, just as Mom had expanded to encompass the woman who had become her second mother in all but biology. "Where are your sisters?" Sophie asked, hanging up her coat. "Lily's at drama practice and Rose called from campus. She's bringing her boyfriend home for dinner tomorrow. Mrs. Chun says we need to interrogate him properly to make sure he's worthy." That evening, after dinner and homework and the comfortable chaos of family life, Benjamin found himself in his study, grading papers from the business ethics course he'd started teaching at the local university. It was volunteer work, something he did because he believed in giving back, in making sure the next generation understood that integrity wasn't just an abstract concept, but a practical necessity for sustainable success. Knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Sophie appeared with 2 cups of tea, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Busy day tomorrow," she said. "The Patterson case goes to trial, and we have that interview with the Journal about the whistleblower protection legislation. Busy, but good," Benjamin replied. "Remember when we thought moving here would simplify our lives?" Sophie laughed. "I remember thinking a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. But this..." She gestured around the study, toward the sounds of Emma practicing piano in the living room and Mrs. Chun watching her evening news programs. "This turned out better than anything I could have planned." Benjamin set aside his papers and looked at his wife, still a marvel, even after 2 years of marriage, that Sophie Lombardi had become Sophie Romano and chosen to share his name and his life. She wore her wedding ring alongside the engagement ring he'd given her that Christmas Eve morning, both bands now scratched and worn from daily wear, symbols of promises kept rather than displays of wealth. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "The bus, the rescue, everything that came after?" "Every day," Sophie said simply. "It was the night both our lives changed completely." Benjamin nodded, thinking of the man he'd been then, isolated, bitter, convinced the world had no place for him. That man felt like a stranger now, someone he'd known briefly, but no longer recognized. "I got a call today," he said. "From Rico, my old supervisor at the warehouse. They're closing the Cromwell facility, moving operations overseas. He wanted to know if I could help some of the guys find new positions." "Of course you said yes." "Of course I said yes." Benjamin smiled. "Funny how life circles back sometimes. Those men gave me dignity when I had nothing else. Now maybe I can return the favor." Sophie reached across the desk and took his hand, her touch as familiar now as breathing. "You know what I love most about you? My devastating good looks and modest nature. Your inability to walk past someone who needs help. It got you fired from your first job, nearly killed you in that bus rescue, and now it's the reason senators want your opinion on federal policy." Sophie's eyes were warm with affection and something deeper. "You can't help but show up for people. It's who you are." Benjamin thought about that, about showing up, about the choice between safety and service, about the way character revealed itself not in grand gestures, but in daily decisions to care about other people's welfare. "We should get some sleep," he said, but neither of them moved to leave the comfortable intimacy of their shared evening routine. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, the first of the season, covering their neighborhood in the kind of pristine beauty that made even ordinary streets look magical. Through the window, Benjamin could see lights in other houses, families settling in for the night, people living their own complicated, beautiful, imperfect lives. "Benjamin," Sophie said softly, "are you happy? Are you happy?" He looked around the study that had become his sanctuary, filled with books and papers and pictures of their blended family. He thought about Emma's laughter in the kitchen, about Lily's theatrical ambitions and Rose's academic achievements, about Mrs. Chun's garden and David's weekend visits, and the work that gave his life meaning beyond personal success. "Yes," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm happy." Benjamin Romano had learned that some stories that begin with everything falling apart can end with something better than you ever imagined possible. He had learned that integrity has a price, but that the cost of abandoning it is always higher. Most importantly, he had learned that heroes aren't people who never fall down. They're people who get back up, who show up when they're needed, who choose to care about others even when the world seems determined to punish them for it. As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs to their shared bedroom, Benjamin realized that his transformation was complete, not because he'd gotten his old life back, but because he'd built a new one worth living. And tomorrow, he would wake up and continue the work of showing up for people who needed help, because that's what heroes do, not just once, in moments of crisis, but every day, in all the small and large ways that life offers opportunities. To choose courage over comfort, the warehouse worker who had once felt invisible had become a man whose life rippled outward in ever-widening circles of positive impact, and that transformation had been worth every moment of pain it had taken. To achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.